Good evening. It's my pleasure tonight to introduce to you Rob Dubin. Rob and his wife Dee spent 17 years sailing around the world and gained some powerful insights from that they're going to share with us tonight. Rob says that star-filled nights on the ocean provided tens of thousands of hours of meditation and contemplation and meeting natives from numerous cultures, and that opened their eyes to different ways of seeing the world. If you would like to hear what he learned, then you're in the right place. And this next talk is going to be quite fascinating, and I'd like to present to you Rob Dubin. Thank you.
When I turned 42 years old, I retired, and my wife and I sold our home in Denver, and we bought a sailboat, and we took off for a 3-year sabbatical in the Caribbean. But along the way, our plans changed a little bit, as they do sometimes in life, and instead of what we intended to be 3 years, turned into a 17-year voyage around the world. We sailed around the planet, and it was a fascinating experience. And when you're out on the ocean in a little tiny small boat, it's about the most insignificant feeling you can imagine. You're thousands of miles of ocean all around you in every direction, and you feel completely insignificant. And you've really surrendered yourself to the wind and the waves and put yourself at the mercy of the universe. And yet, as insignificant as you feel when you've done that, you also feel connected to the entire world, because the oceans can take you to every continent, and you see every glimmer of starlight in the sky above you, and you feel the earth breathing with every wave that lifts your boat. So when there are two of you on a sailboat, one of you needs to be on watch all the time and taking care of the boat while the other person is sleeping. So there you are on watch for 6 hours a day, day after day, and 6 hours each night looking up at the night sky. And over 17 years, these daily watches add up to thousands and thousands of hours of meditation and contemplation. And sometimes the ocean you're meditating on or contemplating is sparkling blue with puffy white clouds overhead, and other times it's a raging maelstrom. And so after 17 years of these thousands and thousands of hours of looking at the ocean, and then visiting so many different cultures and seeing how the other people saw the world, I developed 9 insights that I thought would lead to an extraordinary life. And I'd love to share them with you today. And as we go through them, I'm sure some of them will sound familiar. You'll have heard quotes or other sayings that are similar to these, because some of them are sort of timeless and universal. But what I'm hoping is that when you hear how they appeared to us in our life and how they benefited our life, that if any of them ring true for you and you want to make them part of your life, I'm hoping that by seeing how they appeared to us, it will help you integrate them into your own life if you so choose. So my first insight I actually learned when I was in 4th grade, long before I went sailing. But if I hadn't learned it, I might never have gone sailing. So it could be one of the most important ones. You know, of course, you've all noticed that I'm bald. But what you wouldn't know is that I started getting bald patches when I was in preschool. And by the time I was in kindergarten, I had a number of bald patches on my head, which got worse over time. And when I was in kindergarten, it was really no big deal. The other kids would look at it and they'd want to feel how smooth my scalp was. And then we'd go off and play marbles or whatever kindergartners do. But by the time I got into 4th grade, it was a pretty big deal because I got teased unmercifully. And in those days, the schools didn't have any sort of anti-bullying programs like they do today. And so I really put up with quite a bit. And one day when I was in 4th grade and I was on the playground playing tetherball, these 2 6th graders, and of course the school bullies were teasing me really badly, and they just wouldn't let it go. And finally I just snapped, and I sort of got this tunnel vision, and I heard this roaring in my ears, and I ran at one of these bullies with my little 10-year-old fist swinging as hard as I could. And I don't really remember what happened for the next couple of minutes, but the next memory I have is the gym teacher, who was the playground monitor, picking me up off of this one kid who I had pinned to the ground and I was punching. And the other kid was over to the side holding his stomach and crying, and both of them had bloody noses, and I didn't have a mark on me. And so it was quite interesting in school the next couple days. I was everybody's hero for beating up the bigger kids and the bullies who nobody liked. And that was interesting. And I learned to always stand up to bullies, but I also learned a much, much more important lesson, and I don't even know how I learned it. I don't know if it was from my parents or a teacher or maybe just another school kid my age, but somebody said to me, "You don't even like those kids. Why do you care what they think of you?" And literally, from that moment on in 4th grade, I realized that all my sense of self-worth comes from here, comes from me. I don't need validation from anybody else, and I never look for it. You know, what other people think of me is none of my business. And I'm happy to bend over backwards for somebody, friend or stranger, and help them and do things for them, but I don't do it so that they'll like me better. I do it so that I'll like who I am better myself. So that's my first insight, is that our sense of self-worth really has to come from us. It can't come from anywhere else. And the reason this is so important is this is what allowed me to do the off-the-wall things like sell my house and jump on a sailboat, because I didn't have to meet society's expectations. I didn't have to meet my parents' expectations or anybody else's. I was just living for myself. And it also, I think, helped in my relationship, because I think when you bring an entirely whole you to a relationship, you can find another entirely whole person. And the two of you together can build a relationship based on that shared strength. And that's certainly what worked for me. I met the woman of my dreams. We've been married 36 years and had thousands of adventures all over the world. So that's insight number one, is that our sense of self-worth really has to come from us. Insight number two, so we sold our home in Denver and got rid of most of our possessions, and we put a few things in the storage locker. But we really had to figure out what we could take with us on our boat. And the storage space on a 40-foot sailboat is not very much. So everything we took with us really had to help us sail better, live more comfortably, be safer, something like that. It had to serve a really strong purpose, or we just didn't have room for it. And so we got rid of most of our stuff. And this physical paring away of our things is a really good metaphor for getting rid of emotional baggage that we're all carrying that doesn't serve us. It's not going to help us in our future. It's something from our past. And so if you're carrying a lot of emotional baggage that's not going to help you get where you want to go, just do what we did. Just throw it overboard. Get rid of it. So we were heading off to go sailing. Nobody knew us. We were starting an entirely new life, and we could reinvent ourselves any way we wanted. And I'd been wearing a hairpiece in business for a number of years because I thought it made me more approachable in my business. And the first day as we sailed away from the dock, I ripped off my hairpiece and I frisbeed it off over the stern of the boat. And if you're carrying emotional baggage, telling old stories that don't serve you, you can do the same thing. Just throw it off overboard and get rid of it. You know, it's part of your past, but it doesn't need to dictate who you are in the future. You know, it doesn't matter that your mom was mean to you or you failed at something or got fired from a job. That's just old stories, and if they're not going to serve you, get rid of them. So I've been a very adventurous person in my life and tried lots of new things. So guess what? Since I've tried lots of things, I've failed at lots of things. And the important thing is to take the lessons from your failure and move on. I had one idea in our business that put us a couple $100,000 in debt in like a heartbeat. And I was miserable about it for like a week. And then I got over it. I still had to figure out how to come up with the money to move forward. But I learned my lesson. I don't carry any pain from what my mistake was. So if I were to encounter a similar situation, I know the lesson. I wouldn't make the same mistake. But I don't carry the pain with me. I don't have to feel that emotional pain all over again. But how many people do this in their daily lives? You know, we've all burned our fingers on the stove, but if I go into somebody's house and see their stove, I need to remember that stoves are hot, but I don't need to feel pain in my fingers all over again. And so this distinction is really critical. Remember the lesson, but don't carry the emotional pain. Get rid of those emotional baggage that's not helping you. And this analogy of the stove takes us right into my third insight. And it's about fear. So don't let the fact that you burned your fingers on the stove keep you from enjoying hot meals the rest of your life. But how many people do this? Because, you know, we have a bad breakup or something like that, and then we approach our next relationship with one foot out the door, or we fail at some new sport or new venture, and then we just close ourselves in and don't try that anymore. And again, you wouldn't do that with the stove. You wouldn't stop eating hot food. So don't let yourself be controlled by your fears. And we have told thousands of people about our story of sailing around the world, and probably 70% of them ask the same one or two questions for the first question. So imagine this. I've just told you we sailed all over the world. Imagine the adventures and the things we could have seen and the adventures we could have had. 70% of the people, their first question is, what's the worst storm you ever had? What about pirates? So they're completely controlled by their fears. Imagine you have the whole world at your doorstep, and the thing you're focusing on is your fears. And that's what limits most people from achieving what they want in life. For me, my greatest fear is missing out on a great life. So we all have fears, and I got to tell you, going through a storm at sea or a hurricane while you're on a sailboat is definitely a fearful experience. So here's how I deal with my fears. I do what I call chunk it down. So if you're afraid of your boat sinking, well, get a really sturdy boat and carry extra bilge pumps. If you're afraid of getting lost, carry 2 or 3 GPSs. If you're afraid of getting seasick, take Dramamine, or more likely just heave over the side and carry on. So that's what I do. First, I break down what specifically am I fearful of, and then I come up with a remedy for that fear. So I'm afraid of sinking, get a stout boat, and have extra bilge pumps. So, that green monster under the bed is a lot less scary if you have a flashlight and a monster net. So after you've done those 2 steps, you've chunked it down, you've gotten specific about what you're fearful of, and you've come up with a remedy for that fear, there's just one more step. You just decide to go forward. And that's where most people falter. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and going forward anyway. And I can tell you that for most of us in this room, if we just faced whatever we're fearful of, our lives would immediately transform and get better, because we would go on to our next goals and our next dreams that where our fear is stopping us from achieving. So face your fears, move forward. So insight number 4 is about practicalities. And I don't think you can accomplish your goals in life unless you master certain practicalities of life. So is anybody here familiar with the motivational speaker Tony Robbins? Great. Well, Dee and I had spent a lot of time with Tony Robbins. We had taken a number of his courses and worked with him over a number of years, and we took his mastery classes. And there are 4 areas in particular that I think those classes really, really benefited us. And I think they can benefit everybody. And those 4 areas are mastering your emotional mastery, your financial mastery, relationship mastery, and your physical health mastery. And so in the financial mastery course, I learned how to do the things that would allow us to retire at 42 and go sailing. And I'm no financial genius. I didn't do anything creative. I don't watch the stock market every day. I just did real basic, simple things of understanding finances that everybody can do, but it allowed me to retire and stay retired. In the relationship mastery course, Dee and I learned strategies to help our relationships so we could be on a boat together for day after day and still love each other and get along and have fun together. In the emotional mastery course, we learned what I talked about earlier of getting rid of emotional baggage that's hindering you. We also learned how to wire ourselves for happiness so that we were really in control of our emotional state rather than our emotions controlling us. And of course, we learned, to stay in shape and eat well and things like that so we could physically go do this very active and highly physical lifestyle of sailing on the boat. So, in every area of life, success leaves clues, and Tony taught us how to model other successful people that were having the successes we wanted so that we could model that and have those same successes in our own life. And it amazes me that all of us have gone to school for 12 or many more years in some cases, and hardly spent any time on these 4 areas of life, and yet they're so critical to most people's happinesses. You know, the number one cause of divorce is couples arguing over money or their relationship itself. So there's two areas that we almost never learn about in school, and yet they're so critical to our happiness. So I think if you don't have mastery in some of these 4 areas, you should gain some mastery in those areas. And there are lots of sources. There are life coaches and unlimited resources on the internet or books at the library. So I think if you can master those practicalities, particularly in financial, emotional mastery, relationship mastery, and physical mastery, you'll be a long way towards achieving your goals. So we left the U.S. and we sailed on down through the Bahamas, and arriving at a new country via sailboat is quite different than arriving in an airplane. We would go down through the little islands of the Caribbean, and each island you would go into the harbor and anchor your boat, and then you'd have to go to the port and wander around till you found the port captain and the customs and immigration, and it would be usually in some little tiny dingy office in the back of the port. And in many places that we were filling out forms in triplicate with carbon paper, and then they would type them on these ancient typewriters. And being an American, of course, I looked at that and I went, oh my gosh, this is so backwards. We do it so much more efficiently in America. But fortunately, my very next thought was, if I wanted it to be done like they do in America, I should have stayed home. So the lesson, of course, was to observe without judging. And that's what we were there to do, to observe all sorts of other cultures that we met. But judging them served no purpose. So really, the lesson was to observe without judging. You know, Mark Twain famously said, travel is fatal to prejudice, narrow-mindedness, and bigotry. And many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. So we took Mark Twain's advice and we tried to observe without judging. You know, if you have expectations for how others are supposed to behave, if you've judged them and that they're supposed to think that the same things you think are important should be important to them, they should behave the way you think they should behave, you're just setting yourself up for disappointment, because that's not going to happen. So if you learn to observe others without judging them, then your differences just become something that you notice rather than an annoyance. And, you know, your life changes radically if you stop judging others. It's amazing how just that one thing can alter your perceptions. But I have to warn you, if you stop judging others, you don't know what could happen next. You could stop judging yourself and find out that you are enough. So insight number 6, we'd often find ourselves walking down the sidewalk in some third world country, and we'd be thinking we were safe on the sidewalk, and all of a sudden a motorcycle rickshaw would go flying by us, right next to us, nearly knocking us over. If we tried to cross the street, there were bicycle rickshaws and donkeys and taxi cabs and cars and motorcycles all going on the wrong side of the street in 6 different directions and screaming and honking. If you stepped into a store to collect your wits and calm down, they spoke a different language, they used a different money. If we went back to the boat just to try and relax for a moment, the wind could change. We might have to pull our anchor up, sail out of the harbor on a moment's notice, and try not to hit the reef and sink our boat. And so literally we had to keep our wits about us every minute of every day just to survive. And of course we have a modern new age way of talking about that. We were present and in the moment all the time. And so we literally lived 17 years being present and in the moment all the time. And again, that's just one insight that radically changed us. You know, if you go out to dinner with your friends and you put your phone away and you just focus on your friend, you remember why that person is so incredible to you. If you're playing with your kids and you're not thinking about what you need to do at the office on Monday, you'll notice what amazing human beings you're raising. So if I'm up at Monarch and I'm skiing the Deep Powder and I am fully focused with every ounce of my being on that, I'm getting all the juice life has to offer me at that moment. And for me, that's the extraordinary life that I seek. And if you're fully engaged and in the moment, every moment for 17 years, I can tell you there is literally no other way to live. And for Dee and I, that's how we live every single day. We are always in the moment. We spend very little time worrying about anything else. So that's insight number 6 is be here now, always. But I have to warn you, if you're living in the moment, there's two things you can't do. You can't be beating yourself up over your past mistakes, and you can't be worrying about the future. So, we certainly experience storms at sea and the perils of walking down the street in Jakarta or somewhere like that. But really, the majority of our time is probably spent exactly the way you imagine it. We spent most of our time sitting in some beautiful palm-lined cove, sandy beach in front of us, bobbing at anchor on our sailboat. We'd usually work on the boat in the morning. Maybe about noon, I'd put my book down and I'd grab my mask and snorkel and I'd roll over the side of the boat into 80-degree water, swim down 20 feet below the boat and pluck a lobster off the bottom and bring it up for lunch. And after lunch, we'd usually go ashore and some native would offer us fruit out of his garden, maybe teach us how to weave a plate out of a banana leaf. And in the evenings, we'd be on the beach with other cruisers and have a campfire and probably grill a fish that somebody caught, and somebody pull out a guitar. And our life went like that day after day after day, week after week. And it was just amazing. And we had had wonderful careers and jobs. We had been filmmakers, and we had gotten to travel all over the world. But every job has some part of it that is simply work. And this life didn't have anything like that. There was never anywhere we had to be at a specific time. There was nobody's expectations we had to meet. And so when this went on like that day after day after day, we really had the only emotional response anybody could have to that. And that was just this feeling of deep, deep gratitude. And we'd literally pinch ourselves every night and say, do you believe we're so lucky we get to live like this? And this was another thing that became part of our daily lives. And so we spent almost all day, every day, not just feeling grateful, but living in a state of gratitude. And when you're feeling the emotion of gratitude, you really can't feel all those other negative emotions of anger and greed and envy and depression or any of those other things, because gratitude is such an all-encompassing emotion. So that's insight number 7. Don't just be grateful for what you have, but try and live in a state of gratitude. So insight number 8. So there we were living this amazing lifestyle, doing just what we wanted all day, every day, surrounded by in beautiful places and interesting people and good friends on other boats. And we lived like this day after day after day. And after a while, we began to feel something was missing. Now, how can you say something's missing from your life? You're doing exactly what you want. But we realized what was missing was contributing to others. We had sailed to lots of third world places, and we always carried school books for the kids and papers and pens and things like that. I carried tools or batteries or fish hooks to give to the men, and we had sewing materials usually to give to the women. And we did all of that, and we gave lots of clothes and books and things, but all of those things were really just a Band-Aid for what they needed in these very poor places. 6 months from now, they would need all those same things again. And other places we sailed, they would need big infrastructure projects like water systems or electrical systems or something that we really couldn't have any effect on. But when we sailed into Kupang, Indonesia. Kupang's a kind of a medium-sized city on the island of Timor in Indonesia. And we were met there on the beach by a young woman who was studying to be a school teacher, and she offered to be our guide around town if she could practice her English with us. And she was really personable. So we spent 3 or 4 days with her. She was fantastic, really smart. I know that if she had been in the United States, she would be on a full ride scholarship to Harvard. But luckily enough, even though her parents only earned a couple $100 a month, she had gotten a scholarship to the Teachers College, and she was on her way through school. And the college was quite affordable by our standards, a few $1,000s to send somebody for a year of college. So it's quite affordable. But after spending a number of days with her, we realized how many other young people like her there must be that were missing out on a university education for lack of a few $1,000s, and therefore their life was going to be, they could be a farmer or a fruit seller or fisherman or something like that. And so we were really motivated to see if we could make a difference for women like our friend Nita and men as well, or young men. And so in a matter of a week, Dee and I put together a scholarship program, and we met with the headmaster of the university, and he agreed to keep a couple of slots open for students that we would sponsor. And we went around to the major high schools and met with the headmasters of the high schools, and we set up a scholarship criteria based both on financial need and academic achievement. And we knew the other sailors in the Anchorage would feel like us and want to contribute, and so we raised a bunch of money from the sailors. And sailors are just itinerants like, people visiting Salida in their RVs or something. So next year there's going to be a whole bunch of other sailors sailing through on their way around the world. But we set it up in a way that the future sailors, year after year, would be able to contribute to this, and that the selection process could go on. And it's been 13 years now, and we've sent 35 kids through a 5-year college program. So that was certainly one of the very best things that we did while we were sailing. We left something behind us besides our boat's wake. And so that's insight number 8. I think to be truly fulfilled, you need to be able to contribute to others and be part of something that's bigger than yourself. So we've been back from sailing now for 7 years, and I can tell you that both Dee and I live every day fully in the moment. We almost are never fearful about things, or if we are fearful, we proceed and go through whatever we're fearful about. We try not to be judgmental. We try to observe without being judgmental. We live in the moment. We live in a state of gratitude. So all those things have stayed with us for the 7 years we've been back, and our lives are pretty much constantly extraordinary. And earlier I said that, some of you may want to, if any of these ideas resonate with you, you may want to make them part of your lives. And I think that what made them part of our lives, helped us to integrate them to our life, is that we made them daily habits. And of course on the boat we had no commitments on our time, no calls or things we had to do, so it was very easy for us to focus on them. Obviously, living the busy lives that we all live here ashore, it's harder to find time, but if any of these ideas do resonate with you, I think the way to make them part of your life is to try and find time in every day to make it a daily habit. Insight number 9, the last one, and it didn't really come to us during our trip. It came to me after we got back from our trip, and we started telling people about our experience. And a majority of the people, as I said, first asked about pirates and storms and things like that. So clearly they were focused on, they organized their lives around what they were fearful of. Other people, the next most common question was, how do the two of you get along together day after day on such a small space? And clearly those are people who have some relationship challenges, perhaps. And so as we answered more and more questions, and I realized that even though we had the financial wherewithal to do it, and we had the practicality to learn how to sail and all the other things we needed to do, and the fact that we lived in the moment and mastered our relationship, really more than any of those things, what made it possible for us to do that trip was that we were able to live with a very large degree of uncertainty in our lives. And so the message there is that, the farther we get from our comfort zone, the more magic is out there for us. And this was certainly true for us. Sometimes we sailed to places where we didn't have very good navigational charts, maybe no guidebooks. We didn't have any idea what we were going to find, but it looked interesting. And when we did that, we were risking a lot more. Without good navigational charts, we could have lost our boat and potentially our lives. But every time we risked more, we had more in return. We visited tribes that hardly ever saw outsiders, never saw foreigners, and we had, amazing experiences that very few people ever get to have. And so clearly the farther we got from our comfort zone, the better our lives were. And so that's really the 9th insight, is the magic lies outside your comfort zone. So my hope for everybody here is that you'll face your fears and be fearless, and you'll get outside your comfort zone, and you'll create some magic in your own life. Thank you. Thank you.